of signal for a moment. So to begin again, welcome everybody. Good evening, wherever you're dialed in from. Today is Wednesday, the 22nd of November, and you are taking part in the Mindfulness Network for People of Color's annual retreat. My name is Stuart Taylor, and I am, amongst other things, an artist, a systemic consultant, a systemic constellations practitioner, an embodiment and movement facilitator, and a writer. And the title for this time of our gathering together is A Murmuration of Souls, This Fertile Ground. And I had to look at what I wrote 9 months ago, because I hadn't looked at it from then till now. And the things that I was going to reference 9 months ago, some of those are still very much alive. Some of them have fallen away and become loam, and new things have sprouted. But I thought before I got into any of that material, any of that content, it would be good for us to simply take a few moments to pause. So I'm going to invite you to switch off your cameras if you choose to. And for 5 minutes, we're simply going to focus on our breath. We're going to focus on the ground of our breath. And for me, in my experience, as I'll come onto, this is really the core of my personal practice. So I invite you to join me, and I'm going to mark the time with a bell. And when you hear this again, that will be the conclusion of our pause to breathe, pause to center, pause to grounding. And however you're sat, wherever you're sat, please just allow your sense of weightedness to become present to you, so that your connection with the ground through the soles of your feet is unhindered, so that your sense of connection between your thighs and your sit bones in the seat that you are sat upon is alive to you, that your sense of your spine falling upwards and out of your pelvis is active, and that the connection between the tip of your spine and its point of connection with your skull is present to you in your awareness. You may even choose to very lightly and very slowly rotate your head in the horizontal plane from left to right or from right to left, just to really connect with that point of balance between the top of your spine and, the base of your skull. You can also experiment a little with a very slow, very easy nodding type movement, up and down, north to south, just to really be clear about this very important point of balance at the apex of our spines. Simultaneously, please be alert. Please be attuned to your breath. And for our immediate purposes, please breathe in through your nose. And when you exhale, please breathe out through your mouth. And allow your tummy to soften. Allow your tummy to relax, so that with each inhalation and each exhalation, there is easeful movement. So with each breath, you increase the depth, you increase the range, breathing your whole body in and breathing your whole body out, as if the pores in your skin are actively involved in the breath. Your whole self drawing breath in and your whole self releasing that breath. And with each release of breath, a release of any residual tensions, residual stresses, residual preoccupations from your day. So we become ever more present to this moment, to this place, and to this focus of our attention, our whole selves engaged. And if through this focused period of mindful breath, you've had your eyes closed, I invite you to open them once again, maybe softly with a downward gaze, reconnecting with the physical space that you're in. And when you're ready, please switch your cameras back on. So welcome back, everybody, and welcome to a murmuration of souls. It's an interesting situation to try and condense a lifetime's worth of practice into such a short span of time. So please indulge me if what I offer at any point seems cryptic or apparently condensed. And please feel free at any time to raise a hand and ask a question. You'd be most welcome. This is certainly not a moment of from guru to pupil. This is a moment of from peer to peer, from brother to brother, from brother to sister. So the overarching theme of this year's retreat is creating our cultural calm. And it would be very easy to say at this point in time, wow, do we need to do that? There is so much evident, obvious, violent discord and distemper in the world. So much so that the simple word for that violent discord and distemper is war, which seems to be the furthest point on the continuum to the very focus and point of our gathering today and of the retreat this week. So that we are gathered today and that there is this retreat with a focus on cultivating, creating calm and mindful attention, compassionate attention, seems to me a very desirable, very necessary, and very timely focus. I would say that for me personally, the overarching core of my practice until very recently, and perhaps it hasn't gone away really, has been my my engagement in Buddhist practice. And the most concrete and continuous expression of that practice has been very physical. And by that, I mean my practice has been through my own imagination and my own literal exercising, been primarily based in the dojo rather than a zendo. And just to make the distinction, a dojo is a space for the practice of martial art, as opposed to a zendo being the space of practice of meditation. That said, the form of practice that has most absorbed me, most inspired me over the last 30 years has been my practice of Aikido, which is a Japanese martial art form inspired both by Shinto, which is the indigenous or folk spiritual practice within Japan, and Buddhism. And the simplest, nearest translation of Aikido into English is the path of harmonized energy. And I would say, on reflection, in the context of my practice, that there are three dimensions to that harmonizing of energy. The first dimension is the ways in which we gain greater understanding, greater insight, and greater physical connection to the energetic dynamics, to the relational dynamics that inform us as individuals. And through our practice of Aikido, which is predominantly with a partner or with multiple partners, we learn to repeatedly recalibrate ourselves at the level of our physical engagement, our psychological engagement, our emotional engagement, and our energetic engagement in order that we can practice in a robust, vigorous, and compassionate way with other people, whether they're male or female, whether they're older or younger, whether they're more or less experienced than ourselves. So there's always a relational element. There's always a relational dynamic in play. And of course, we all bring very different perspectives, very different levels of appreciation or understanding of the physical and technical dimensions of the practice and of the historical and philosophical foundations and context of the practice. And this is actually a beautiful thing. This is actually a meeting place within which it becomes possible to weave connection, to deepen our attunement, and to really appreciate the value of inquiry and cooperation and the bounty that is intentional community. I would say that out of my field of practice of 3 decades of Aikido has emerged my practice in the present as a systemic constellations practitioner. And I don't want to give a treatise as such on systemic constellations practice, but I do think it's appropriate to say something as concisely as I can about it as a distinct psychotherapeutic modality, and say something about why I think it has great pertinence and potential for people, individuals, communities of global majority heritage. And I think I'll focus on just 3 elements pertaining to systemic constellations practice. The first of them is that for many people who become aware of systemic constellations practice as a distinct modality, they remain unaware of its roots, of its origin. And from my perspective, the origin of systemic constellations practice, which is predominantly recognized as a European modality, is actually South African. And to be more precise, to be more specific, I would claim that the roots of systemic constellations practice are within Zulu culture. I make this claim because the founder of systemic constellations practice was a German national, and his name was Bert Hellinger, and he died several years ago. When he was a younger man, post Second World War, he spent a period of 16 years living in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. And the reason he was there is because he was, at that time, for those 16 years, a Jesuit Catholic missionary priest. And in that role, he was embedded, he was enmeshed in Zulu community and Zulu culture. Formerly, his role there was as a teacher and latterly as a manager of school districts and the schools within them. After around 16 years in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, Hellinger returned to Germany and defrocked. He left the church, he left the Jesuit mission, and subsequently trained in European psychoanalytic and psychotherapeutic modalities, both here in Europe and in the US. Out of that process emerged systemic constellations practice. And it's in fact this history and its impact that I am writing a book currently entitled Ancient African Futures, a Decolonial Poetics of Systemic Constellations Practice. More of that on another day. So that's the first piece I wanted to say about systemic constellations practice, is its origin within African culture and specifically within Zulu culture. And the reason that's so important, the reason that's so radical to state and to espouse and to advocate is because it points to another dimension of European colonialism, whereby an indigenous cultural practice, an indigenous cosmology has been absorbed and assumed to be something of European origin, much to my personal discomfort, and I'm sure much to the discomfort of many others from global majority heritage backgrounds. The second element in relation to systemic constellations practice is that rather than look at the dynamics taking place within an individual, it looks at the dynamics taking place between an individual and their immediate system, which for most of us is our family of origin, whatever the actual shape or size or balance is within our family of origin. It's the first system within which we learn the rules, such as they are in that context of being a person. It's the first context we learn what it is to belong and be part of a family, be part of a system. However much retrospectively we may understand that specific system to be one of health or one of poor health, one that is damaging to our growth, to our developing as a rounded, grounded, sensitive, attuned, compassionate individual. Whatever is the case, that's where it begins for all of us. And constellations work looks at those dynamics, but not just in the context of the present, but also in the context of what happens within those family systems and what has happened in earlier generations of our family system. What has happened for our parents? What has happened for our grandparents and our great grandparents and our great 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 grandparents, all the way back to the extent that it is knowable. And there's a very basic premise within constellations work, which is to say, those people, those experiences that are rightfully part of our system, when they are excluded by way of being ostracized or deliberately obfuscated or disconnected or forgotten, whatever challenging or distressing symptoms are occurring in the present, are actually the signals of those forgotten or excluded elements in our system. So in fact, in the present, we can channel dynamics, we can channel shocks or impacts that happened within our system or to our system, and unless they are attended, acknowledged, addressed, they will continue to have presence, and they will continue to cause disharmony in our systems. The third piece, the concluding, or rather the unconcluding piece I want to say about systemic constellations practice, is that it is woefully, appallingly underrepresented in the context of practitioners and the literature around the practice by individuals from global majority heritage lineages. And I said I would save a conversation about my book for another day, but I have to say one other thing in relation to that book. So not only am I looking at properly excavating the roots of systemic constellations practice emanating from within Zulu cosmology and by inference indigenous, other than European, other than Western cosmologies, I'm also making a claim that unless and until these roots are properly honored, properly acknowledged and recognized, the modality is a form of white, liberal, elitist practice and is not connected, is not attuned, is not able to hold the realities of the lived experience of the majority populations of the world, who know about war, who know about colonialism from the underside, who know about enslavement, who know about marginalization, who know about the multiple brutalities of modernity and post-modernity, so-called, as exercised and exported by the global north. Concurrently, until and unless these other historiographic dimensions of global majority heritage cultures are accepted and honored and acknowledged, there's a great loss to the huge resilience, inventiveness, creativity, compassion, wisdom, and joyful knowledge and relationship with Gaia, with Mother Nature, without whom none of us could be here, without whom all of us are dependent upon. So that's the other dimension of the book, is to really make explicit this correlation, this very necessary rebalancing of our understanding as humans of our place in the web of life. And this is pertinent because systemic constellations practice puts a great deal of emphasis on our rightful place and our rightful size in the context of the systems we are part of. And my contribution, if I can call it that, is to re-emphasize the fact that life is not pivoting on the presumption that humans are the apex of life. So that's enough for me about that aspect of my practice. So one of the things that I wrote back in March was that I would talk about some of the projects that I'm in that offer concrete illustrations of how and where my practice, my mindfulness and my embodiment practice shows up. So I'm going to talk very briefly, simply because of time, about two dimensions. The first of them is an emergent project that I'm involved in with a partner who is called Zega Kibrom, and she is based in Sardinia and is of Eritrean and German ancestry. Myself, I am of Irish, Scottish, Nigerian, Ghanaian, and Ivorian Coast heritage, by way of St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean. We met several years ago in an online learning program that was exploring collective trauma. And the host and producer of this particular program themselves is of European heritage, Austrian heritage to be specific. Now, we could have a whole hour, week, or month exploring that particular experience, but suffice to say today, the intended focus of exploring European colonialism in Africa in that 9-month learning program focused on collective trauma and healing was in effect re-traumatizing, simply because whatever the good intention was of the European designers, hosts, and facilitators of the program, unwittingly, they repeated patterns of domination, patterns of presumption about the nature of African cultures, about the nature and capacity of global majority heritage folk in the present. Fast forward, maybe a year ago, maybe a year or 18 months after the project ended, my colleague Zega reached out to other folk who had participated in the program, asking if anybody would be interested in having a conversation about what we had experienced. I could easily change experience to endured, and I can easily change that to how we had prevailed. Suffice to say, I offered to support her any way that I could. And in the end, we ended up co-hosting a series of open space events online for colleagues that had participated in the program. Fast forward again, Zega and I are now in a position whereby we have received modest investment from an American philanthropic foundation, which will enable us to create a program called Kita Decolonial Healing Circles. And without wanting to seem presumptuous, the focus and the purpose of our project, Kita Decolonial Healing Circles, is to create a space and an environment where people from any ethnic or cultural background can engage in an open, collaborative inquiry into what constitutes decolonial healing. We are not prescribing a specific approach or a specific methodology, but we are going to be facilitating a collaborative inquiry which we understand from the get-go will inevitably evolve and develop cohort by cohort. So this is one of the concrete ways in which my practice of the last 3 decades has a life and a shape and a form in a community setting, in a community context, whereby whatever it is I have learned or attained is able to be available and be informed by and continue to develop through connection in community with other inquirers, with other practitioners. The second illustrative example that I think is appropriate to share here is a project that I've been involved in for several years now that's entering a stage of accelerated development, is a project called, for now anyway, the Unmuseum. And this is a project that is originating out of Bristol in the southwest of the UK through an organization called the Black Southwest Network. And in a sentence, the Black Southwest Network is an anti-racist organization that operates across the cultural sector from Bristol down to the tip of Cornwall in the far west, and has been doing so for perhaps the last decade. In this specific project, the Unmuseum, what we're developing is both a physical space, a virtual space, and a relational space in which Black cultural heritage can be appreciated, curated, engaged with, and learned from on the terms of Black cultural heritage producers. Simultaneously, it will be a space for the creative development of new expressions of Black cultural production, both at a regional, national, and international scale, avowedly and determinedly not looking to replicate the European model of a museum. So I thought I would unconclude with a new piece of writing, which is called Eragata, which in Hamric, which is the indigenous language of Ethiopia, translates as serene. Let's cultivate the skills to resource ourselves, be able to step into the spaces where there is suffering, and do the work, of healing. We will, by definition, bear witness to human suffering, to the suffering of our other than human kin. We're shifting our relationship to trauma. We're owning our own susceptibility. We're owning our own vulnerability. We're pivoting our focus towards healing. This is our expression of compassion. I'm so grateful for your attention. I'm so grateful for your time. And I encourage you heartily to participate in as much of the remainder of the Mindfulness Network for People of Color retreat as you can. And I look forward to a time when we have more time and we can have a dialogue, and I feel less like I'm one of those eccentric people at Hyde Park Corner standing on their inflatable soapbox. And yeah, I look forward to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. And I'm looking forward to the Kita project and this collaborative work. It just sounds so exciting. We want to hear more about this project in Cornwall and Devon and across around the anti-racist work. Um, it just feels like seeds. Um, and I know you have such an elaborate field of research and trainings and everything. And um, I just feel something is going to click in the next few years with you also part of our network and sharing your wisdom all the way from Japan to the stuff that we're doing here. It's such an eclectic mix. That's a definition, isn't it, of African that that we take also, we've learned, we gave into the world. I love those last words about a new compassion, how the Africans we will show our compassion. And we haven't seen that yet. It flourish in its entirety. And it would be great to see what's going to happen. So I really want to bless your work and thank you for coming and doing this presentation. Any comments from anyone else?
Yes, I just want to say thank you, Stuart. That was very interesting. And actually, I know from somebody who grew up in Togo and in the area of Senegal that this form of interaction between the individual and his community as a way of reflecting back was something she recognized happened in her own culture. So it's not even just Zululand, but I understand that that's where in this sense, it traveled out into the world. But the fact is that this is something that occurs in more than one African culture. This way of integrating a person back away from an imbalance into harmony, using everyone basically to reflect about. It's definitely,
Absolutely,
yeah,
Zenobia. And you know, you're quite right to identify in this specific context. I have to talk about
yeah,
the Zulu
yeah,
culture and the Zulu community because that's where this German national happened to land,
yeah.
happened to pitch up on the continent. But
Mm,
my inference, and I'll be explicit about this in the book, is that this is an illustration
mm,
of a continent-wide and actually global phenomenon of
mm,
the creation of knowledge and the understanding of our relational capacity as humans, not just to one another, but in relation to our non or other than human
human
kin,
kin. Yeah,
and especially in relation to our ancestors. Because in most, if not all, indigenous cultures, very significant weighting is placed on our relationship with our ancestors and the way in which that cultural phenomenon, that cosmology has been framed for so many of us is through the lens of European colonialist anthropology, which so much is lost in translation in terms of the actual resonance, in terms of the actual position, in terms of the actual relationship. So my humble contribution will be to offer a little bit of a tilt to that framing in order that a more accurate citing and hearing of these practices can happen.
Stuart, may I please say to you very quickly, because I really shouldn't be here. I should be on another call, but I'm finding it so hard to leave. So thank you so much for your very thorough, a very thorough exposition of your work in a very brief time frame. You said that you wouldn't be able to do it justice, but you did it such good justice. So thank you for that. And I wanted to, I'm sure you're familiar with Linda Tuhiwai Smith's work on decolonizing methodologies, which points exactly to this problem of repressing and silencing the not only indigenous but traditional wisdoms of so many lands that have been colonized and dominated and peoples oppressed. So that work, I think, it sits really well with what you are unveiling. But also across Africa, there is more and more work happening, actually at a higher education level, on recovering indigenous wisdoms. There's a lot of this happening, especially in Kenya, but it's pan-African. And so, you know, the ways in which we have been conditioned, even psychological systems, you know, to be thinking, of course, Frantz Fanon unpacked this so well and died at such a very tender age, because this is really his work of bringing to light the ways in which practices of people across Africa and in many other lands, where, because all lands have indigenous people, and the ways in which these knowledges and practices have been completely overshadowed by Western therapies and methodologies is pretty frightening. So I heard something very recently at the Othering and Belonging conference that said that in the 18th century, you know, when Europe speaks about the European Enlightenment, in the 18th century, there were only 200 people who actually created the European Enlightenment. There's so many of us. That was the messaging. There are so many of us. This came out of the words. The words were from John A. Powell, Indigenous Worldview. Beautiful. I can't see it too clearly, Stuart, but I just wanted to say John A. Powell is on this in terms of the belonging work. This idea that there are so many of us, and it is taking all of these pieces of the puzzle to recreate the tapestry and the patchwork that is worthy of these times. So I want to thank you, and I'm so sorry that I have to leave, but what a beautiful evening to spend with you. Thank you so much. And go well.
Always good to be able to say TBC.
TBC. Thank you. It took me a little while. I've got it. Go well. Go well. Hambagashle. Are you still in South Africa, Stuart?
I'm very much in London, UK,
Okay.
until the UK spring, when I intend to be in that there South Africa.
Okay. Hambagashle is the Xhosa for go well. Go well. So we often say go well, and that's you go well, people. Bye-bye. Good night.
Well, Kathy May, thank you.
Thank you so much.